Welcome to the Nervous System Care and Healing Podcast, where we talk about how to take care of ourselves in mind, in body, in spirit, while we navigate systems that were designed to keep us dysregulated. I'm your host, Liz, a neurodivergent therapist of color, and I'm really glad that you're here. Hey, everybody. Today, I want to share some reflections on the topic of hope and what it means to have hope in a world that is filled with so much grief and turmoil and suffering. And my intention with this episode is for you to feel more hopeful and empowered after you listen to this. So though I'll be naming some difficult and uncomfortable things, I'm doing it with the intention of moving us toward the possibility that the world we live in today, in its suffering and pain, doesn't have to be the world that we continue to live into and create in the future. And so whatever type of news or current events that you may be plugged into right now, whatever is happening in your local area or in your regional global context that you're attending to, I think we are all noticing that so many of us are struggling right now. So many communities are suffering. So many people are lacking access to safety or basic needs, whether that is due to the impacts of capitalism, colonization, imperialism, fascism, climate change, and all of the systems of oppression that exist in our world and that are human-made. And sometimes it might feel like there's so much going on, it can be hard to even keep up with the pace of the news coming out or the multiple layers of crises that are unfolding in different parts of the world. And even though it is all interconnected, these systems of oppression and these sources of suffering, it can feel overwhelming to take it all in at once because our human brains were not designed or evolved to process this volume of information and crisis all at the same time, constantly without pause. I want to name too that we each have our own ways of processing and metabolizing and reacting to what's happening. And there are different considerations we need to make based on our social locations and who we are, how we move through the world, and how we're perceived by the world. So each of our processes is going to look different. And today, as I make a case for hope or a call for hope, I will invite you to take with you whatever resonates, set aside what doesn't, and to note that your personal relationship to hope is your personal relationship. It might be an ongoing relationship that we need to build with ourselves and something that we need to actively practice and train our brains and nervous systems to access. I think about, too, how it is so easy to go to that place of despair because that's what those systems of oppression around us are designed to make us feel. They want us to feel like it's too late already to do anything about it. They want us to think that we're all doomed anyway. It's not worth it to resist or to stand for your values or to fight back against oppression. They want us to think, oh, I might as well just sit down and take it. And if they can get us to believe that, then they get us to do their jobs for them. And one of the ways that these oppressive systems start to rob us of our autonomy is by convincing us that the future is already written. And so to actually have hope in these times is a tremendous resource. To be hopeful is a radical act in this world. And I see hope as a way to disrupt feelings or cycles of dread and doom that can keep us stuck and spinning and disempowered. And I don't think any of us want to live there, no matter how much sense it makes to feel that way. And I want to be clear here when I talk about hope, I'm not saying that we should all just bypass all of the bad things, look away from the stuff that makes us uncomfortable. I'm not saying we should just focus on love and light and that's it. That would be a very incomplete conversation. And that would be a type of avoidance that, frankly, I don't think we can afford to have if we actually want to move toward a better world, right? There's an avoidance that can come with only focusing on the positive or forcing ourselves to feel grateful or to count our blessings when we haven't first been seen or acknowledged in the ways that we may be in pain or suffering. I do think there has to be a certain order to things where we acknowledge the grief, we acknowledge the pain, we validate that anger and rage and sadness, and any feeling that you have makes sense and is valid here. And that we don't stay stuck there forever for our own sake, for our own health. So what I'm proposing here is a type of hope that can exist alongside any feelings of grief that we may have. And I'm proposing a type of hope that can stretch our worlds and make our worlds bigger than just the 24/7 cycle of bad news. A type of hope that can remind us to look left and to look right and to look around us and to not just stay hyper-focused on the thing right in front of us. And when we can access this type of hope, it can also connect us to more capacity, more emotional and energetic, even physical capacity to be with what is here. And it can help us access more courage and capability in ourselves. And all of that can move us toward aligned action. So this isn't the type of hope where we just say, okay, I feel hopeful, I'm going to hope for the best, and then we just sit on our hands and don't do anything. Rather, it is a type of hope that mobilizes us to build the world that we want to live in. And this is somewhat of an individualized thing where, because we're all moving through the world in different bodies, different nervous systems, with our unique social locations, intergenerational histories, and also different accesses to privilege, resources, different ways that we feel safe or not safe in certain spaces. So I just want to say there's a context to this that will be personal to your life, and that what feels hopeful or hope-giving for one person might not make sense or be accessible for another person. So it is important that we each build that unique, personalized relationship with what hope means for us and how we're experiencing right now. So what I'll do now is share a list of things that have given me hope in the past few months, past year, and they've become a part of my personal practice where I remind myself that there is good happening in the world, also good trouble happening in the world in terms of resistance against suppressive systems. And I've been practicing turning toward these reminders in order to refuel my nervous system when things feel hard. As you listen to these examples, maybe your brain will start to connect you to what are those breadcrumbs of hope in your own life as well. So the first part of my hope practice is I look for the seeds. I look for seeds of potential that give me a reason to believe that the world that we're building is one that could be, less oppressive, more sustainable, more joyous and lovely than the one we have today. And a very literal example of this is that I am in the process of building or planting a garden. I'm going to be moving into a new home in the next couple of weeks. And so we are buying seed packets, planning out what we want to plant where, blackberries, raspberries, tomato plants, cucumbers, all the delicious things. And in this interim period, before we're able to move and actually put roots into the land or put seeds into the land, we are planting things in buckets and pots, and we're going to then transport it into the land once we're officially moved in. And it's this idea that it's actually never too early to start dreaming and planting seeds. The little seedling growing in the bucket today, we're going to put it in the ground and it's going to expand into the earth and one day grow into a tree that can blossom into fruit that feeds us for years to come. Another part of my hope practice is witnessing acts of courage and reminding myself that there are people around us, among us, resisting engaging in mutual aid networks, for example, finding ways to care for each other in their communities to make up for those gaps in our social systems and our healthcare systems that really fall short. I see people getting involved and getting organized, finding their role in their community. Different ways that people are rising up to protect marginalized folks. There is much work to be done, of course, so I'm not saying it stops here, but that to just notice that there are starting points, to notice that something is happening rather than nothing, that enough for me is still reason to feel some hope. Another thing that gives me hope is learning about the history of resistance in our collective human communities. There is a podcast that I love called Art of Resistance by Rebel Yell Creative, and it's all about using writing, music, and art to resist the status quo. So there have been episodes about the art created by the Black Panthers to embolden a community. There's an episode about queer surrealists versus Nazis and how small anonymous art and writing made a dent in the Nazi machine during World War II. There's episodes on indigenous resistance movements, on radical feminists, on women, witches hexing the patriarchy, right? There's so much creative inspiration in the ways that all of our communities have resisted across time. And so if we can learn where we came from and who came before us, that can give us a direction for our future and where we can go from here as well. And to know that we're not building from scratch. Another place I look to for hope is I look for examples where humans have used creative problem-solving skills to address issues, systemic issues in our society. So one specific example is there was an article titled, "The City of Baltimore, Maryland, will turn 911 into more than just an emergency number." And this article explained how Baltimore is building out a service that will operate around the clock to respond to crises when police are not needed, so that when people call 911 and they're experiencing something that doesn't require a police response, like maybe a mental health crisis or someone who actually needs access to shelter and housing and basic resources, the 911 dispatcher can connect them to the actual resource they need instead of sending police to their location, which often or can result in an unnecessarily escalated, traumatic, violent, or even deadly encounter based on the way that police and state violence happens in this country. And so the idea behind the Baltimore Mobile Crisis Team and the new service that they're building out this year is to get people to referrals to a psychiatrist or a therapist or legal support or a case manager, and to skip the part where we need to bring in badges and guns and handcuffs to handle something. So this is an example where we see a problem, a huge systemic problem, and then we see people creatively using resources, using human brain power and skills to address that problem in a way that is much more safe and sustainable and just makes more sense. And my hope is that we'll see more examples of this spread across the country. Another thing that gives me hope is spending time in spaces that prioritize education and that bring community together. So I'm going to read a few quotes from an article about Portland trail guides who build community through science, education, and whimsy in drag. So basically, there are drag queens in Portland, Oregon, who also work as trail guides. And so they bring people out into nature and they teach them about the land. And there's a quote by one of the founders of this organization called Drag Me Outside. This founder is named Ephemera Gendera, and they said that drag is supposed to be radical, and so is education. So let's put those things together. That's exactly what people need right now. The article goes on to say that these nature outings are meant to be fun, inclusive, educational, and low-impact experiences where people get to enjoy nature as well as each other. I know that I'd be interested in signing up for this group hike or group walk by Drag Me Outside because it just sounds so delightful. So the more that we can see community spaces like this popping up in creative ways, I think the more we can feel that hope just naturally building in our nervous systems. It brings a smile to my face just to think about it. The final piece I'll touch on here is spending time in spaces of care and grief, and how that can also connect us to hope, even if that seems paradoxical. So the article I will uplift here is titled, "She Invited Her Friends to Come Together to Make Her Casket." So in a nutshell, this article is about a woman with a terminal illness diagnosis, and she wanted to bring her friends together to help prepare for the end of her life. And under the guidance of a professional basket weaver, these friends weaved together a burial tray made of natural materials like pine and willow. And they spent a few days together making this. The end result was this really beautiful, natural casket, as well as this shared experience of friendship and connection in acknowledgement of the inevitability of the end. And the woman who organized this event, the one who has the terminal illness diagnosis, said, "It is my wish that we all talk about death a little bit more easily because we all face it. I knew some of my friends would struggle with doing this, and I asked them anyway, and they came anyway. So it's a gift that they've given me, and I hope I gave them a gift also." Now, as I read this, I feel that sense of grief and sadness sitting alongside that hopefulness, because for me, it's that hopefulness of knowing that for the scariest or most overwhelming and uncertain parts of life, right? Death and endings, that we can choose to be in connection with others, or it can be an isolating, disconnecting, and fear-filled experience. And that though the default or the status quo may be the latter right now in our Western society, our natural human instinct to connect and to care for each other is so strong. And the ways that we've disconnected from that instinct are also going against our true nature as human beings. Hearing stories like this one with the friends coming together to weave a casket, that gives me hope that our future as a humanity can be more connected, more life-filled than how we're currently living today. And then finally, I'll speak to those little moments of joy throughout the day that become fuel for the nervous system. I can think of a few examples off the top of my head where the other week we had our neighbor knock on our door and bring over some bits of fresh salmon for our cats because they knew that we have 3 cats, and it was such a lovely gift to receive, and it's also an act of relationship building. Another moment of joy in the past week was getting to walk in the woods with my 2 dogs, who are actually newly adopted rescue dogs from the Humane Society, and seeing them explore the nature and sniffing all the rocks and the trees and the grass and the flowers, and just seeing their little souls light up and play and run around in the creek made me so happy. And so there are ways that we can microdose or macrodose joy throughout our days just by noticing what's already here, what we're already in connection with. For you, it might be your pets, or it might be putting the headphones over your ears and listening to your favorite song and that source of auditory joy. There's so many entry points to joy we might notice throughout the day. So I'll end with these notes here that this is my list of hopes and joys and acts of courage that come up for me right now. And that list will change and grow across time. But I really want to leave us with this idea that when we are looking for breadcrumbs of hope, it gives us something to live for and live into the next day, because as human beings existing within systems of oppression, we need not just something to fight against. Like, we do need to be clear what we're fighting against, which is oppression. But we also need something to live for. when we're connected to that hope, we can allow it to move us toward action, and we can be resourced by hope as we build the world that we want to live in. And if you need a place to start, if hope feels very abstract right now, I want you to notice if you can feel access to hope anywhere inside of your nervous system right now. Because for me, hope is not just a cognitive experience. It's not something we can just think our way into, but it's also embodied. And for me, hope shows up as this warmth and this kind of golden light feeling in my heart. So go ahead and end it here. And my invitation for you is to notice, what are your breadcrumbs for hope? How does that hope move you toward action in your life, in our world? And then how do you feel that hope in your nervous system right now? And let that be a practice that builds and grows from day to day. All right. I'll talk to y'all next time. Thank you so much for listening to the Nervous System Care and Healing Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. And if you ever have a few minutes to leave a rating and review, it would mean so much to me, and it helps other people to find the podcast and spread the care. Please remember that this podcast is not a replacement for therapy, coaching, or professional mental health services. The information shared here is generalized, it may not reflect every individual nuance, and it should not be interpreted as personalized mental health advice. So please do seek out additional support if you need it. Take care and be well. This is Liz at Nervous System Care and Healing.